Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to welcome you to our 2023 Edwards School of Business Dean Speaker Series. My name is Keith Willoughby, and I'm the Dean of the Edwards School of Business, and I have the opportunity of serving today as the MC for today's wonderfully important, and I am confident will be an incredibly valuable privilege for us to chat with an esteemed alumnus of our college. As we gather here today, I do want to acknowledge that we are meeting here in Saskatoon on Treaty 6 territory. This is also Western Region 2A of Métis Nation, Saskatchewan. As part of that acknowledgement, I personally want to recognize Métis and First Nations ancestors of this place as the original caretakers of this territory. And I myself, who have family generations ago from the Ukraine and from Norway and the British Isles, who made their living on the land. I'm grateful for those who went before who cherished this land. Today we'll have a wonderful opportunity of learning from someone who in his business continues to cherish the important resource that is the land around us. I acknowledge that we have an opportunity as a business school to participate in enabling truth and fostering reconciliation that will be important not just for ourselves, but also for community and for our broader society. Today is a wonderful privilege we have as opportunities in our business school here to participate in this Edwards Dean Speaker Series. This event is annually held, has sort of a kickoff event to the academic year. And over the past several years, we have had many illustrious alumni who have returned and visit us either in person or during the pandemic virtually. Today, we have the privilege of having an esteemed alumnus back in our college speaking to us face to face. I am pleased to welcome this year Mr. Murad Al-Katib, B.Comm class of 1994, as this year's Edwards School of Business Dean Speaker Series. I will give you the abridged version of his bio. If I gave you the full version of the bio, we'd be here till next Tuesday. But let me mention here that Murad is the President and Chief Executive Officer of AGT Food and Ingredients Incorporated. He is an international agri-food, strategic business, and financial champion. He founded AGT Foods 22 years ago, in the year 2001. He has built a Canadian startup from your basement, I believe, a Canadian startup into a global billion-dollar value-added plant-based protein company that, in essence, is feeding the world. Murad, like many of us here in this room, is from small-town Saskatchewan, born and raised to Turkish immigrant parents in the rural community of Davidson, Saskatchewan. He completed his B.Comm here. And in conversations with him, he and I actually shared some same professors that taught our classes when we did our B.Comms years ago. He graduated with distinction in finance and organizational strategy with his B.Comm from this university, and later completed a Master of International Management with great distinction at the Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University in Tempe. He began his career in the public service with the Government of Canada, and then was the founding director of the Saskatchewan Trade and Export Partnership, STEP. He has had a number of board roles that he served on, including the Industry Strategy Council of the Government of Canada, serving in 2020. His current board appointments include the Canadian Pulse and Special Crops Trade Association, the Protein Industries Canada Supercluster, and the Board of Directors of Saudi Arabia Milling Company. He's also a graduate of the Rotman Institute of Corporate Directors, ICD course, and holds the ICD.D designation. I see Norm Sheehan here, who is a faculty member within the ICD.D program. Murad, two things I'll mention about him. A passionate advocate of Canadian agriculture who speaks extensively on the challenges and opportunities that face Canada's agriculture sector. He's also passionate about entrepreneurs, and he champions what he calls compassionate entrepreneurialism, working to expand female, youth, and First Nations participation in business startups, and really advocating the role that entrepreneurs can play in advocating social change across this world. His recent awards include the 2021 ABEX Business Leader of the Year Award, the 2017 Saskatchewan Order of Merit, and in 2016 being named to the UN Association of Canada Global Citizen Laureate. We are grateful for you joining a full house in person, as well as several who are joining virtually. I do want to thank you for providing your time today. Just to explain how this will work, Murad will deliver his presentation. Please hold your questions and comments. There'll be an opportunity after Murad's presentation to engage in a questions and answer period. For those who are joining virtually, you can submit your questions via chat, and Carly will let me know those questions. Without any further ado, let us welcome a truly esteemed Canadian, world and global business leader, Mr. Murad Al-Katib.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I can tell you that, when I drove up today, I knew I had made it because, here I came into the Commerce Loop and there was a cover on a meter with my name on it. So the only thing I ever saw in that loop was tickets with my name on it. That's something that I got quite a few of when I was late for class and I'd park in the loop. So anyway, great to be back today. So what I want to do is, when I think about the topic I want to talk about, I kind of termed it from downtown Davidson to the world. And I thought what I would do is I'd take you through my entrepreneurial journey because, here I was, 30 years ago, sitting in the same seats that you guys are sitting here. And, again, I was a young man who, had a vision of what I wanted to do in my life and what I wanted to do in terms of making a difference in the world. And, ultimately, I want to give you a chance to kind of get to know who I am, where I came from, because I think that, that's a really important thing. And, I've got some friends in the audience here that I grew up with. Stephanie and Tracy came from Davidson. Their kids are actually in the college, so that's kind of nice to see some faces. But I want to kind of start right at the very beginning because, it's funny when when I started my company, I never forget the first, farmer meeting I had in Rosetown, Saskatchewan. And, a farmer came up to me after and he said, "I really liked what you're saying and I understand totally, but, God, you speak English well." So he was wondering where I came from, right? And, at that time, in rural Saskatchewan, a guy like Murad Al-Katib was not a normal, kind of a name that you would see out in agriculture in rural Saskatchewan. But, I'm a child of Turkish immigrant parents. So my parents came to Canada in 1965, and they were searching for a life to raise a family. And so my father came as a country doctor. So many of you know as, someone who grew up in rural Saskatchewan, my dad came, sight unseen and, came to a place called Saskatchewan. He said, sounded really nice. And so, on December the 12th of 1965, my dad arrived. It was minus 43 degrees. And he had no idea where he was. And, good thing was that he left my mom in Turkey at the beginning and came here for a year to get settled. And then she followed him as a young bride after that. And, I always kind of say my father, I'm very proud to say, served the people of rural Saskatchewan for 55 years as a full-time physician. So at the age of almost 80 years old, he was still seeing 40 patients a day. And my mother is even a better story. She came as a young bride, learned to speak English watching Sesame Street with us kids. And in 1976, she was the first immigrant Muslim woman elected to the RM of Wilner Rural Municipal Council. So if you think of that, a woman immigrant Muslim elected in 1976 to an RM council, and forget an immigrant Muslim woman, a woman elected to a rural council wasn't happening at that point. And my mom was a community advocate. She was an activist that, fought for rural Saskatchewan, and she spent 27 years as an RM councillor, Riva the RM, town councillor, and mayor of our community. And so I grew up in a household where I came from 5 generations of doctors, and I'll never forget the conversation I had to have with my father when I was in grade 11 in 1989. I said, "Dad, I don't want to go to medical school. I want to go to business school." And my dad looked at me and he scrunched his eyebrows and he looked at me and he said, "Business school? Well, what would you do with that?" And I said, "Dad, I want to be an entrepreneur." And he looks at me and says, "An entrepreneur? That's not an honorable profession," he said. To him, it was a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Those were the only 3 honorable professions, right? And I'll tell you more about the story of my dad when we come back to the end. But here I took off and, went from Davidson and came to what is, of course, now the Edwards School of Business and, did my Bachelor of Commerce degree here. And then, decided at that point that I wanted to continue my education. And in my mind, the 1990s were a very difficult time in Saskatchewan. It was not a time where the economy is what it is today. And, coming out of business school at that time, jobs were limited, opportunities were limited, right? I could have taken a job with the Royal Bank of Canada making $24,000 a year in rural Saskatchewan. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but I felt like I wanted to do more. And so, again, now Brooke Dobney's in the room here. I don't know if he'll remember, but here I was sitting in Brooke's office, and Brooke says, hey, we have another Prof. Jack Dart, whose son is at a school called Thunderbird in Arizona. You should really think about that. And I don't know if Brooke remembers that. But Brooke is the one who put Thunderbird in my brain. And Thunderbird was the #1 rated international management program in the world. And I only had one challenge at that time. Thunderbird only took students that had 5 years of work experience, and you had to have a really, really, high GMAT score. So I took care of the first one and got the really, really high GMAT score, but I couldn't take care of the fact that I didn't have the experience. And so, again, I'm going to talk a lot today about resiliency and about, passion. And I had a passion for wanting to continue my education. And so every day for a month, I called the Thunderbird School of Global Management to try and get through to the registrar. And every day I didn't get through to the registrar. And one day, the assistant of the registrar was sick, and the registrar himself answered the phone. And that was the day that I talked to him, and he said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 30 minutes of my time. I said, okay, when can I schedule that? He said, how about Thursday in my office? Well, this was a Tuesday morning. And so I actually walked out of the meeting. I went to my mom. I said, Mom, I'm going to Arizona. I packed my car up. I drove for 2 days to Arizona. I went to his office, and I had 30 minutes that turned into an hour, and I was the youngest student that was admitted into the Thunderbird School of Global Management that year. So there were 1,400 MBAs from 111 countries when I went. And so some of the people I graduated with, I have to call them because last week, Mark Smuckers from the Smuckers Jam and Jelly Enterprise, who was my classmate, paid $5.2 billion for Hostess, which is a terrible buy in my opinion. So I'm going to, call him up and tell him that I think he made a really bad deal paying 19 times EBITDA for a business. But, ultimately I went to Thunderbird, and then my desire was to get into international emerging markets, and the geopolitical center of the world is Washington, D.C. So my very first job was at the Canadian Embassy in Washington. And so I got a job at the embassy in Washington. I went and spent a year there. And then when I finished, during my time in Washington, we had the visit of a newly elected premier named Roy Romano. And Premier Romano visited us, and I was involved in his program. And again, with his officials, I kind of said, look, Saskatchewan has what the world wants, right? Emerging markets need what we have: agriculture, potash, uranium. And everybody agreed. And so what I did was I wrote a proposal and I sent it to Premier Roy Romano. And one day my phone rang, and it was the Deputy Minister of the Premier of Saskatchewan who said, young man, I read your proposal. I'm intrigued. Come see me. And at the age of 23 years old, I was hired to head up an emerging markets international trade strategy for the government of Saskatchewan. So, what I went through was what I would call the big fish, little fish dilemma. Here I was, a #1 ranked international business MBA, right? Fortune 100 companies on my campus. I'm in Washington, D.C., but I just couldn't get Saskatchewan out of my mind. And, to me, there were two ways I could get there. I could slug it out for 10 or 15 years in New York or London or Toronto, or I could come back to Saskatchewan and get a chance to do things here that I would never have the chance to do in another jurisdiction, just because I could be a big fish in a little pond. And so, as I said, I came back and I accepted a job as the Emerging Markets International Trade. So I packed my bags, and I remember those calls to my friends at Thunderbird, and they said, you're going where? You're going why? Back to Saskatchewan? And, again, for me, it was, again, this agricultural potential that just kept dragging me back, right? What is everybody talking about today is not a surprise to anyone who's kind of studied international political economy and geopolitics, right? The world is growing, right? Arable land and water are in scarce supply. Food security and food inflation is high on our minds because we've just come through an economic cycle where for your whole lives, you've never seen inflation. we've barely seen inflation in my generation. We kind of remember the 80s that were like inflation, but we were too young, right? We were 8 or 9 or 10 years old then, right? But, again, the agricultural potential of Saskatchewan, was what kind of kept drawing me back. So, again, when I started my first company, I will tell you that I'm not a creative guy though, right? Business students aren't usually very creative. And so, I just wrote down on a blank sheet of paper, Saskatchewan, Canada, and I underlined Sascan. And that was my very first company I started, which was called Sascan Pulse Trading. And it's funny because it's still a global brand. If you go to the Middle East region, it would have probably a 30 or 40% market share in lentils and chickpeas and beans in the Middle East as Sascan brand. So I always knew that we succeeded in our branding when I was in Bangladesh once and we were at the International Pulse Federation meetings, and they had a trivia competition. And they said, which province in Canada grows all of Canada's lentils? And there were, 72 responses, and 57 of them were Sascan. So, so I knew that our branding was very effective, right? Because it wasn't Saskatchewan, it was Sascan. That's where all the lentils were grown. So anyway, that's my funny story. But, I remember being in high school, and, I was, again, Stephanie knows because she was in my class from kindergarten to grade 12, and I was never a usual guy. I was always a little bit different. And I did love history. And my father, I think, was really passionate about history. And Sir Winston Churchill as a person, if you've never taken time as a young person to go just Google Sir Winston Churchill quotes even. That would be enough for me, for you to go and look at some of the things that Sir Winston Churchill said. And this one, history will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. Right? This is a very, misunderstood comment, right? Many people took this at the time that Churchill was very brash and very arrogant. And in fact, he was very convicted, right? He knew that what he was doing in his mind was the right thing to do. So when you're doing the right thing, history will ultimately be kind to you because you're writing history. And so, it's a quote that I kind of remembered. And so, again, here I am in government. I have to tell you the story of my wife, Michelle. Down at the main floor of the Commerce Building, there was a round table, which I think is still maybe there. And one day I walked into that, bottom floor, and I saw a girl sitting there. And, again, I kind of looked again, and I said to my buddy, I said, I'm going to date her. And he's like, yeah, right, sure you are. And so that was Michelle. And so she was in her 4th year of Commerce too, never met her. What I found out later was that I actually had met her. I'd been in 3 or 4 classes with her, and she hated me. So that's the real story. But I went and sat across from her, and then the next day I sat closer, and the next day I sat closer, and then I met her, and then she wouldn't date me for 3 years, and then we finally got together, and we've been together for 27 years. But I remember going to Michelle. She was 6 months pregnant with our twins. I was an assistant deputy minister level in our government by then. I'd been there 5 years. I quit my job. I moved to the basement of my house. And I told her, we're going to start a lentil company. So her first question was, what are lentils? That was the first question. Second question, she looked at me like I'd said, let's run off and join the circus, right? Start a business, long hours, lots of risk, but the potential for a big payoff. But for me, the rationale was really simple. We were educated. We had enough money to pay our mortgage for 9 months. And we had great parents who I knew wouldn't let our twins starve. Okay, so I was like, let's try it for a year, right? What's the risk of trying to start a business for a year? And, I recognized very early on that I had, an idea, and I had a view of what I could do. And there was a transformation happening in agriculture in Saskatchewan. When I was a kid growing up, every farmer grew wheat, and then they grew canola. And then after they grew canola, they had to use so much nitrogen fertilizer, and the nutrients in the soil were so depleted that they had to leave their soil to black dirt, summer fallow, we called it. So they would have to not plant a crop every 3rd or 4th year. There was an alternative. It was to plant a legume, a lentil, a pea, a chickpea, naturally fixed nitrogen in that soil. And so it was a protein-rich crop that fixed nitrogen. And so my bet wasn't a big bet. 15 million acres of summer fallow would convert to pulses with the great work of people like Dr. Bert Vandenberg at the Crop Development Center at the University of Saskatchewan and Dr. Tom Warkentin, and all of the colleagues at the Crop Development Center caused varieties to be developed right here in Saskatchewan that worked. So my bet was that I could build a processing company to encourage the farmers to switch from summer fallow to pulses. So I founded Sascan Pulse in 2001 in the basement of my house. Today we're about $2.8 billion in sales. So from that small little plant I started in Regina, we now have 46 manufacturing facilities in Canada, the US, Australia, South Africa, Turkey, Kazakhstan. And so we export to 120 countries. In 2002, I was alone in the basement of my house. My CFO, Lori, who's still with me, was employee number 2. And we now have about 2,600 employees globally. I'm going to tell you the journey, but from early on in my company, I decided that what I needed to do was capitalize the company. I needed to grow. And I needed to have access to capital to do that. So very early on in my journey, I decided to do something not very easy, which was to take a small Saskatchewan agricultural startup company and take it public on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So in 2007, I did the smallest single income trust offering, in that year on the Toronto Stock Exchange Venture Exchange. I raised $14 million. I took my company public, so I bought out the venture capital companies in Saskatchewan, and I decided to take my shares and use my shares as the means to raise money to globally consolidate. And so in 2007, I was about $50 million in revenue, which is a pretty good little Saskatchewan company. And then in 2008, I kind of structured with that $14 million I raised. And then in 2009, I decided to execute a strategy of growth. And I did, in 6 years, I did 16 acquisitions in 5 continents. I grew the revenue $300 million a year for 7 consecutive years. So I took it from less than 100 million to over $2 billion in revenue. And, along the way, we grew to $1 billion public company. And then for those of you, who are in finance, I want to say a lesson I want you to know is, I was telling the dean at lunch, I'm going to use an analogy. Being a public company is not an easy thing to do, okay? And it's really miserable, to be very honest with you. And, again, I always characterize it, in our sector, we call it pulses. Pulses are lentils, peas, chickpeas, and beans. We were the only public company in the world in pulses. So imagine every 90 days, you get to walk out on a stage and you get to have a spotlight on you and you get to take off all your clothes and you're the only one naked and everybody else in the room is fully clothed, right? That's what being a public company is, right? You have to show everything under your continuous disclosure obligation, right? Now, why would you do that? You would only do it if the shares that you have to issue, that there's a buyer for those shares where you can take those shares and put them into a Xerox machine and print an unlimited number of shares and sell them and raise millions and millions of dollars. And if you can't do that, you don't want to be public. So I did that. And I took myself from a small company to $1 billion market cap. And then my share went from $42 a share, and the Indian government decided to put tariffs on lentils and peas. And the market panicked, and our shares went from $42 to $13 a share. So our market cap went from $1 billion to $300 million. So my lesson to you today is, if your shares are overvalued, sell shares. If your shares are undervalued, buy your company back. So that's what I did in 2019, is I went to Canada's largest insurance company, Fairfax Financial. And Fairfax is a company that many of you may not know the name of. But if I told you, how many have ever bought Easton or Bauer sporting goods? Anybody? Okay, Fairfax wholly owns those companies. You ever eat at the Keg? Montana's, Eastside Mario's, New York Fries, Harvey's, Pickle Barrel, Kelsey's, Original Joe's. They own all those. Right? So they're Canada's largest insurance company. What they do is they take the float where people invest in insurance policies. They take their money and they invest their money until they pay claims. And I partnered with them and the Ontario government pension, and we launched a bid for $1.2 billion, and we bought our company back. So, the important side of that is that, we've globally expanded, and we've concentrated on not only building assets for our business, which is processing staple foods for the world, But we've also focused on logistics. We focused on supply chain. So supply chain, as the Dean and I were talking, is a very, very important part of what we do. Not a well-known fact, AGT is now the largest short line railway in Canada. So we own 690 kilometers of railway infrastructure in this province now. We own our own locomotives. We own, if you've ever seen a Saskatchewan grain car with a Saskatchewan flag on the side, I own all of those now. So those were, I liked Monopoly when I was a kid, so I always bought the railways. So I kind of figured that, I should buy a railway at some time. And I have to tell a story from my friends from Davidson. So, I phoned up my friend Cliff Cross, and he said, I heard you bought the railway. And I thought he was going to be excited because, there would be grain cars and all that. And again, I was like, yeah, I bought the railway. And he's like, oh, I can't wait to do a pub crawl from Davidson to Regina on the train. So that's all the guys in Davidson wanted to do, was jump on the train and stop at every bar on the way to Regina. So anyway, we don't do that because of the safety. So that's not something we do in our railway. But we have a commodity business and we have a retail business. So if you go today to any superstore or any Loblaw store in this country and you buy a package of pasta and it's in a yellow no-name or a President's Choice box, it's manufactured at my factory. So we actually take durum wheat from Saskatchewan and from Mexico and from Europe and from Turkey, and we ship it into a plant and we produce 600 million retail packages and we ship them to 60 countries around the world. And we do that in Turkey, as an example. That's where that business is centered. If you've ever bought, Beyond Steak, which you probably haven't because it's in the US, but the fava beans in the Beyond Steak is our ingredients. Or Nestle oat milk, uses ingredients from our company. Sun Chips, Veggie Chips. Or if you've ever eaten Kurkuri, Indian Cheetos, that's our chickpeas. So, we do everything from cans, retail packs, and in pulses, we're the largest pulse company in the world today. Now, I want to kind of take you up now. I want to take you up to the fundamental of why do you care, right? You just, spent this time to come to the Dean Speaker Series to hear me speak. The FAO in the United Nations says that in the next 40 years, the world has to produce the same amount of food that we produced in the last 10,000 years of civilization. Okay, that to me is a staggering statistic that ultimately is the opportunity, but it's what keeps me awake at night. Because I say, as a baby is hungry, they cry. When a 19-year-old man is hungry and unemployed, they protest. Okay, civil obedience and food security and food inflation is a major challenge for this world. And, when we look at that ability, to meet what I would kind of call the two sides here, population growth, 10 billion people by 2050. The one that I think is more of an opportunity for us in Canada is on the right-hand side, 33 trillion in middle-class spending in Asia by 2030. Right? This is an opportunity that I think, defines you as young people. The consumer that Canada will serve 10 years from now is completely different than the consumer we serve today. And it should be, because Canada has been caught in what I would call the commodity ghetto for so long that we produce all these commodities and we ship them all over the world and we don't do any value adding. Now, value added doesn't just mean food products that you buy at the store shelf. It could be ingredients, right? I think our big opportunity in Canada is to provide ingredients to the world. It's how do we take the products and refine them and make them into value added. That's what we did in lentils. When we built the first plant in Canada, it was splitting lentils. It was taking the red lentils from a farm, it was peeling the skin, it was splitting them in half, it was polishing them, and it was packaging them for distribution around the world. So, that I think is the big opportunity. And when we look at the opportunities that we have in this province, it's what I call, let's boil it right down to plant-based food and feed, plant-based fuel, and plant-based biomass. So, the opportunities exist for us to take the crops that we grow and use every single component of it, right? That's where we're transforming our company today, is into a total plant utilization. So I'm going to give you an example of what we do today. We take a lentil, we peel the skin, we take that skin off so that it cooks quicker, and that's the way the world consumes it. We take that skin and we purify it and we make it into cellulose fiber that's used in the food and bakery industry. Or we take that fiber and we send it to our Rosetown, Saskatchewan plant, and we combine it with micronutrients, and we produce a natural micronutrient fertilizer product that the fiber encapsulates the micronutrients. So when the farmer puts it in the soil, the micronutrients don't leach away with the water. So what happens is when you put micronutrients down, you want them available for the roots. And what happens is they run away from the roots is that they're not there. So our research showed that the cellulose fiber encapsulates it and it absorbs the water and it provides the biomass to hold it in place. So we've, designed a system. We built a new plant in Rosetown that's going to be producing this year 12,000 tons of a natural fertilizer that's going to be in a partnership with Federated Co-op to distribute around this province. So this is about, smart fertilization. It's about total plant utilization. Then we take that lentil and we extract the protein and we sell it to Kellogg's, and they're making a new special K cereal that's protein fortified. Right? So those are the ways that we use that. And we take the starch that's left over after the protein and we sell it to Frito-Lay, and they make a lentil snack. Okay, so that's the way we kind of look at things. And I'm going to talk about fuels in a second because I think it's a really important part of what we do. So what I said about pulses, again, I'm educating you guys. Just think about pulses means lentils, peas, chickpeas, and beans. And why is it important? There's three main components: protein, starch, and fiber. That's what they're made up of. So you could think of a bean, or you could think about, hey, what if I broke down that bean into its pieces? What could I do with that different? I'll give you a perfect example how this whole thing started on plant-based protein. And everybody talks about it now. Somebody asked me when I was designated as the Globe and Mail CEO Innovator of the Year, they said, what do you think of the plant-based revolution? And I said, well, I don't know. We kind of started it. So again, history will be kind to us, for we intend to write it. Right? We went, again, back as early as 2009, and, Kraft Heinz would say to us, we really love pulses. We want to use it in baby food. But the babies can't digest the fiber. So how do you extract the fiber and give us the protein? How do you give us the natural color, the orange of the lentils or the green of the lentils? But we can't have the fiber. So using completely natural principles, right? Density. Imagine how simple it is. Right? Protein is lighter than starch. Fiber is a skin. So if you can remove the skin and you can granulate a powder, and the protein and starch are different densities, you can probably separate them. Right? That's as simple as it was. So we built a $100 million factory to try and do it. So I don't recommend doing that because it's been a little painful to spend that much money. But the market has caught up over years, in that type of thing. So protein, starch, and fiber. And so today, where we use those products are not just about eating lentils, it's about snack foods, right? Plant-based meat analogs, batters and breadings that are not gluten, pasta. So, in every single General Mills Progresso can in the United States and their gluten-free cans coming from Campbell's has our veggie pasta in them. So it's a yellow pea-based pasta. And it has a resiliency where when you take a bite of it, it's not that squishy, gross canned pasta mouthfeel. It's got a real bite to it. So again, why? It's the starch is different than wheat. So lentil and pea starch stays together when you put it under high heat. Pet food, plant-based milks. So, I had my, I shamelessly had my oat shaken brown sugar espresso half sweet today, and I love it, right? So those are the kind of alternatives. Now, right here in Saskatoon, we decided that this was the center of innovation. So we opened our own R&D center. So if you go to Stonebridge and you ever see the AGT signs there, that's our R&D center. And so there, some of your colleagues from the different colleges around this university get the opportunity to go to our private R&D center. They work there, and they're literally working with Nestle, Danone, General Mills, Kellogg's, Post. They're working with Beyond Meats. They're working with some of the global majors on the food innovation that's coming in plant-based in this in the world. And that's all being done right here in Saskatoon. So that's done in collaboration with the university, but we have our own private R&D center. So these are, products that we're launching now, right? Veggie pasta. Veggie crumb has launched in Superstore under the President's Choice pea crumb. So that's a yellow pea crumb that you can use instead of using wheat when you're making, chicken strips or you're making anything like that. And the cool part of this is when we put it on and then you either flash fry it or air fry it, and you go back 20 minutes later because you didn't eat your last chicken strip, it's still crunchy. So, those are the kind of things that, the different starch profiles and mouthfeels do. We built an extrusion factory, so we're making chunks, slices, strips of granules. So these are all kind of showing you the innovation of food is, it's not the family farm anymore, right? It's not just about growing that crop on the farm and then giving the commodity. It's about what we've been able to do to transform that and create billions of dollars of economic activity right here in Saskatchewan. So all these snack foods, again, are products that come from our ingredients. So this is, again, that sustainability thing I said. Today, carbon intensity of agriculture is one of the most important phenomena that is not understood by the world. Agriculture is one of the biggest polluters in the world today. Now, don't get nervous. We're also society's solution to climate change. We're the sector that has this massive opportunity for carbon intensity transformation. And our farmers in Western Canada are already doing it. And the big part of what they're doing is they're growing legumes after the canola. So, imagine that third rotation, every third year now, no more nitrogen fertilizer. So now take a 3-year cycle and imagine our greenhouse gas footprint compared to every other large broadacre agricultural jurisdiction of the world. We have a sustainability agricultural profile that no other region of the world has. That is ultimately what is going to be the generational opportunity for this province as we go forward. So look at this right-hand slide. Now, by the way, I had a really great, lasagna with meat sauce at lunch at, what's the restaurant? Philosophy. It was great. The old Alexander's when we were at university. So I'm not telling you not to eat meat, okay? But just look at the right-hand panel, on the water consumption. On a unit of beef, 1,857 gallons of water. The same unit of beans or lentils, 43 gallons of water. So it's not about eating less meat. The world protein consumption is going to rise so fast that the world can't produce enough animal protein to meet the growing demand of protein consumption around the world. So it's about plant-based alternatives. How many of you 10 years ago, well, you're the generation, maybe you did eat hummus 10 years ago, but we certainly didn't. Plant-based alternatives are a lot more mainstream. I saw a Wall Street Journal study the other day, and it was like a group of consumers that were your age, and 42% had not eaten a Big Mac in the previous 12 months, and 86% of those surveyed had eaten in a Chipotle restaurant in the 12 months prior. Look at that change in consumption, right? Beans, lentils, rice bowls versus the Big Mac. That's a transition in consumer tastes and preferences. It's driven by environment. And, I say my daughter, Sarah, who's, doing her Master of Science in Women's Leadership, she's your guys' age. She's not an environmentalist by any means. She is a socially conscious, highly intelligent young lady. She will make her decisions on what she buys by the social purpose of the companies, the respect to the environment that the companies have. Each of you, many of you are grounded the same way. So I think that that's the opportunity. So technology and innovation is what agriculture is about today. It's not about the family farm anymore. In my company in Regina, sometimes I look and I have more IT programmers than I have grain buyers. Okay, they're developing apps, agtforproducers.com, right? Handheld apps where farmers go in and put in their targets and we hit their targets and we're giving them information and dissemination. And then farmers are collecting the data on everything they do, right? How much fertilizer are they putting down? Where are they placing their seeds? What is their yield gains? What is their soil types? They're mapping their fields and doing variable applications using GPS, right? This is the opportunity for all of you. And you don't have to be in computer systems or in agriculture, right? All of us are looking for business grads and all types that can go in and work in technology, innovation, food, distribution, logistics, supply chain, right? That's the opportunity in agriculture today. So I chaired the national strategy of the Government of Canada in agriculture. And in 2019, we set a target that agricultural exports in our country could rise from 45 billion to 85 billion by 2023. And that domestic agricultural output would rise from 120 billion to 145 billion in that same period. So we actually said that we could grow the Canadian agriculture sector by $65 billion in a 5-year cycle. In year 3, we exceeded the target. What sector of our economy in Canada can tangibly deliver $65 billion in new economic activity? Only, in my mind, agriculture. Okay, so from that perspective, I want you to think differently about agriculture as you go forward. I want to talk about what I would call a generational project in our province. And, a project where, we talk about the intersection of agriculture and the intersection of energy transition, right? Society's solution to climate change is a word I used earlier. Imagine now that the canola fields of Saskatchewan are the same as the Saudi Arabian oil fields. Only every August, we harvest a new oil field, right? Every year we renew. We take that canola, we're going to bring it to Regina in partnership with Federated Cooperatives. So my partner in the project, Patrick, is here. And so nice to see him. I didn't know he was going to be here, so great to see him. And we're going to partner with Federated Co-op, AGT, and we're going to build. Imagine that we're going to take that canola to Regina. We're going to crush it to oil. We're going to build a hydrogen project. We're going to place that hydrogen molecule into the canola oil. We're going to produce a molecularly identical structure to a hydrocarbon diesel. We're going to take the canola meal. We're going to extract the protein from the meal, send it to produce tilapia, shrimp, salmon, and steelhead trout. And we're going to put that canola back into the tractors that make that canola again the next year. Imagine the impact of billions of dollars of economic activity that allows us to be in a position, where we take what we call this concept and we build what we call the integrated value add complex, where the strengths and the values of Federated Cooperative System and AGT's values of community development come together, and we build a project where we take all of those streams and we use them. And what we do is we actually contribute to the decarbonization of the transportation and agriculture sector by providing that renewable. And we provide enhanced eatable protein to the highest use. And the highest and cleanest use in our minds is protein for aquaculture. Right? The world is short of salmon, shrimp, tilapia, and steelhead trout. And they're short of fish meal, which is the main protein source. The world is looking for sustainable protein, and their alternative today is South American soybeans. And it will never pass because deforestation in South America is a major challenge. And so from that perspective, Western Canadian canola is the lowest carbon intensity feedstock of any feedstock to be used in renewable fuel in the Americas. So that's our advantage. So this is, again, a generational project where, the companies are committing about $3 billion of capital to build this. And it'll start, we hope, construction in 24 and finish around 2026. So why canola? Take a look at that one that says efficient. That's the one that really jumps out at me. Canola-based fuel has the ability to reduce greenhouse gases by 90% when compared to petroleum-based fuel. Our modeling is showing that by measuring the gains in agriculture and yields and the reduction in nitrogen fertilizer use over a cycle, that Saskatchewan canola-produced renewable fuels can become a net zero fuel. Not be produced as a net zero. It will be a net zero fuel. Why do we talk about energy transition when we have a net zero fuel? Right? This is, again, a very, very important generational opportunity for this province, and one that I think is very, very exciting. And all of you are the ones coming into this new green, clean economy. Right? So I think that's the most exciting part of what I see for you. So I've now taken you company and up, and I'm going to bring you back down now. I'm going to take you right down to something that's really important to me. It's entrepreneurship. And, again, I lost my dad in 2020, and I still remember a couple of stories. They know my dad. He was quite a character. And, again, I remember when I received my honorary doctorate from the University of Regina, I said, "Dad, I'm finally a doctor." And he looked at me and he said, "No, you're not." So that was the first one. But anyway, I still remember, and again, a little bit of emotion for me, but my dad, he passed in May of 20, and it was during COVID. So that was a blessing for me because I travel over 200 days a year. And during that time, I grounded myself for the first time in my career. And I spent about 60 of the last 90 days of my dad's life with him. And every day I would come, I'd be in Saskatoon. I'd drive that road 4 times a week. So I would go home and work, and I would get up the next morning, and I would be here for supper, stay overnight, drive back, do the same thing again. And I was driving, I would always pick him up and go down by the river. That's where he loved to go. And we would drive down there. And the day before he passed, he looked at me and he said, "Son, I realize now you're feeding the world, and that's noble." Right? So that, ultimately is, what we're doing is, we're taking entrepreneurship and, what we've decided in our company from the very beginning of our existence is that, compassionate entrepreneurism is using investment in private enterprise as a means to solve society's problems. I don't believe that governments in this world can solve problems. They can be a contributor, right? They can be a part of it. They can actually contribute to the problem, but they can also contribute to the solution. NGOs are a part of the solution. But entrepreneurs ultimately will solve the problems that will bring this world clean drinking water, clean air, and food security. Okay, those are the things that entrepreneurs' power will do. And the one thing I really struggled with as I built my company is this concept of profit, purpose, and philanthropy. Right? What's the difference? Like, is it okay to make profit while I'm doing something good for the society and for the world? And at the beginning, I didn't know how to feel about that. Today, the benefit of being successful is you get an opportunity to do all kinds of philanthropic things. Right? I get to give away, hundreds of thousands of dollars of my money, and I get to feel good. And I don't just do that. I give my money away and make other people give money with me. Right? So that's, how I approach it. It's not about just giving my donation. If I'm going to do a cause, I get involved, I lead it, and I make, 20 times what I gave be raised in what we're doing. That's the way we approach it. But, to me, ultimately, giving is essential to your culture. So remember, as you're building your business and your entrepreneurial journey, I say act locally. So in every jurisdiction, I've got 5 continents, we try and act locally. Right? Remember one thing, you've got to focus too. You can't give to everything. So, we try and have a balanced portfolio of giving. Right? For us, communities are really important. So if you drive around this province, probably I think 11 skating rinks and curling rinks and community centers in our province are AGT centers. Why? That's where people go to laugh. They go to celebrate. The biggest weddings are there, and the biggest funerals are at those community centers. Right? They're essential to the fabric of rural Saskatchewan. And those communities never have money to do anything at those centers. They can't replace a furnace or do a project, right? They could barely have enough money to run them. So we do that. Another thing we did is, many of you wouldn't have known that Stephanie and Tracy knew, I'm a rock star wannabe. So I love to play music, and 2 years ago we got together, and a friend of ours was going through cancer. So we said, let's put a band together and help John through his journey. And we put a band together, and we're like, we should raise some money. And so we decided to do a charity event, and we raised $2.2 million for cancer. And so we were able to buy a 4D CT simulator for the Alan Blair Cancer Clinic, and we were able to gift Saskatoon $400,000 for their campaign to buy a 4D CT simulator. And along the way, it was pretty cool. We got invited to open for Loverboy, the Northern Pikes, and Burton Cummings on a big stage. That was pretty cool, right? So, and my son came up and he's like, "Dad, you guys didn't suck." So that was like the ultimate, I would say that's the ultimate compliment, right? So anyway, it's important to raise for causes, right? I kind of went through this already. Like, I believe, again, that entrepreneurs have that power. And, again, innovation is a big part of that, right? You've got to think outside the box. It's not just about, box solutions. So, I'm going to tell you about one problem that we tackled. This was that profit and purpose thing. In 2016 and 2017, the world faced one of the worst refugee crises in our history. 8 million Syrians were displaced from their homes, And, again, it was an emergency displacement where, again, these refugees had to be fed every meal. There was no shelter, there was no food, there was no drinking water. And, in the region, they sprung to action. And the United Nations and the International Red Cross, Red Crescent were the main parties that were managing the aid effort. And we went to the United Nations. We're the largest supplier in the world to the UN agencies for refugees. And we went to them and we said, look, what about if we just did a simple concept of a cardboard box that had a balanced nutrition for a family instead of distributing all these separate items? And they're like, well, that sounds really good, but we have to feed the maximum number of refugees. So that will be extra packaging, extra consolidation. It just won't work. And we said, you know what? Let's try a pilot. And we sent them the data. We said, look, here's what we estimate you're losing in distribution. Here's your extra packaging costs. Here's the net economic benefit that we think we can distribute to you. So we did that pilot, and the pilot checked out. And in 2017, we did 4.5 million parcels that fed 800 million refugee meals that year. And we made millions of dollars of profit. And the United Nations estimated they saved $18 million in distribution that year. So that's that reconciliation of profit and purpose. And I didn't feel bad about that. I felt amazing that I had made a lot of money and the UN had made $18 million at the same time. So that's, again, I wanted to kind of use it as a case because I think that, when I look at it, currently we're working on Ukraine, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, the Horn of Africa famine. And all of these are happening. And again, I know now that profit and purpose are not at odds. ESG is something that, again, you have to be very aware of. Environment, social, and governance is no longer something that you just have to think about. It's mandatory. Okay, how you treat the planet, how you treat your people, and how you govern your company are not only going to be demanded by consumers, but your banks will demand it, pension funds will demand it, and all the capital in the world will demand it. So it's not about governments regulating you. So to us, ESG matters. Everything we do, ultimately with what we do and what Federated Co-op is doing in the project together with them, it's all about, the ultimate, in our side, close the protein deficit, right? High quality, healthy plant-based ingredients. Plants and biomass can provide the base materials for sustainable food, fuel, and feed. Financial results are only part of our story. Right? Outcomes that make a material difference to a healthier population, that's equally important in how we measure success. And it's not only about how we measure, it's how our employees measure success. Right? Again, all of you want to make a good paycheck, right? But you're also going to want more than that. I see from your generation something that we didn't see as much. People want to feel good about going to work every day. They want to be treated well. They want to have a purpose. Those IT girls and gals and guys that are programming for us go, we love this. Like, we're bringing food to the world. We're interacting with farmers. We're doing something that's way different than just sitting and coding. For some company that's doing an app that really doesn't matter about the world, you might get your pizza faster. Okay, but that's not the same as impacting global food security. So, for us, it's about, kind of that transparency. It's about that. And I'm kind of encouraging you that, if you're not doing it in your studies, and you have a chance to do a project, choose ESG and understand it. It's really, really important. When you walk into a job interview and you talk about ESG and your understanding of environment, social, and governance, a company will want to hire you. Okay? So I'm going to just end with a couple of things here. Churchill, I can't resist again. This is also one of my favorites. Success consists of going from one failure to another without loss of enthusiasm. Remember, very few people have the luck that I had, right? The first company I started became a $3 billion company. Most entrepreneurs fail 2 or 3 or 4 times before they finally find the venture that they succeed in. Now remember, you can be an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur. Okay, don't forget, if you decide to be an accountant and you're at PwC, you can still be an entrepreneur within your organization. At Federated Co-op, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that I'm dealing with every day. So don't think of it as only owning your own business. Jack Welch, the famed CEO, now these guys are all getting old, so they won't even know these, but these guys were crazy leaders. So Jack Welch, control your own destiny or someone else will. Okay, that's again, know what you want, go for it. Protect yourself, don't be reckless, but don't be scared. So my last tips for success, again, a Churchill quote, the price of greatness is responsibility. Okay, I always, again, if people say, what do you like the most about your job? There's all the things I told you. What do I hate most about my job? I'm responsible for 2,600 families. That's the way I view it. Not employees, it's families I'm responsible for, right? I have no fear. Okay, that's not a cliche. You know what? People are afraid of the unknown. If you do your homework, you have no reason to ever be afraid. And in today's age of data and analytics and predictive analytics and decision support, you and your career have no excuse to ever be afraid. Okay, even in our day, we could make a decision tree and decide what was going to happen. We predicted what would happen. So in my business career, I was never afraid because I knew that what might happen, I knew kind of the iteration of what was going to go on. So that's why I was never afraid. So, do your homework, be prepared and you won't be afraid. Business is a constant job of sales and marketing. To your employees, to your banks, to your stakeholders, to your suppliers, to your customers. We're selling every day. Okay? Culture is key. Actually, just hold on before I go on. I told the dean I was going to do this and I forgot, but I have to do it. Okay, how many of you are accounting majors? Okay, a few. How many of you hate accounting and finance? Okay, I'm sorry you guys have to take more accounting and finance. Okay, to me, in today's age, if you are not financially literate, you will not succeed, to your maximum potential. Doesn't mean you have to be an accountant or you have to, love finance, but you have to understand a profit and loss. You have to understand whether a company is making money or whether your division is making money and what you're spending it on. Right? So ultimately, financial literacy is very, very important. Culture in an organization is key. And what I always say is a difference between a good leader and a great leader. I've been in the U.S. a lot. I studied in the U.S. I met a lot of U.S. CEOs over the years. And so many times I get this, Murad, I got to give you my worst Texas accent, We got a culture in this company. Everybody is cut from the same cloth in this company. We all know exactly what we're doing, and everybody toes the company line, and that's why we succeed. Those companies will fail. There's no doubt they will fail. Embrace diversity. Embrace diversity of thought, gender, right? Experience, background, right? At the end of the day, embracing diversity doesn't mean that there's not a boss that has to make a decision, right? You ultimately collect the input and you make the best informed decision. That's what great leaders do, is they surround themselves with people who are completely opposite to themselves. And they're not afraid of that. In fact, they know it makes them stronger. Why would I want people the same as me? Nobody's better than me. So why do I want somebody exactly the same as me? I want somebody different than me. Right? That was not arrogance. Well, it kind of was a little bit, actually. Okay. I'll admit that. And I think that what I want to end with is have passion. Okay, now I got one more for you. We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. So I'm going to end there.
Well, thank you, Murad. That was an incredible opportunity to learn from your experience, learn from your journey, learn the pitfalls and the opportunities that you've seen in your career. Folks, this is our chance, our opportunity to ask questions, provide comments, feedback. Carly will send me any comments if there's some coming from our virtual attendees. But the opportunity is open to you. The floor is open. There's a mic in the center. If you have a question there, please feel free. Gord Haddock, batting leadoff.
Murad, thank
Hey, Gord,
you.
good seeing you.
Yeah, good to see you. With the current problems in India, and it's in the news today, India buys a lot of food from Saskatchewan, and of course, Saskatchewan part of Canada. Do you think that there's going to be retaliation and a cutback in purchases of our lentils, peas, etc.?
Gord, the situation is still so fresh that it's really hard to predict what the outcome is. But I think that what I always kind of try and rely on is agriculture and food supply is the most political issue in the world today. And in India, food inflation has been rampant. Supply of basic commodities and food, including pulses, has been more limited because of their local crops. And so I'm optimistic that, again, calmer heads will prevail, and that ultimately, the products that Saskatchewan is providing, like lentils and, lentils, basically, that's the main commodity today, they'll continue to flow. We're watching the situation very carefully, and again, it's always worrisome when there's allegations, and then there's expelling of diplomats, and then response, from the other side. But, again, we keep saying to the government of India and the government of Canada, we are natural partners, right? India is a country that, we as a company have put a lot of effort. We've decided as a company that we've sold our plant in China and we're investing in India. And so, again, while, I'm concerned about the situation, we view India as a big part of the future for food. As a rising middle class, food consumption is, a major part of their culture. And, from that perspective, I maintain optimism, but we're watching it very, very carefully. I didn't give you much of an answer because I don't know yet, but yeah, it's a tough one.
Go ahead, Kent.
My old friend who looks amazing. I haven't seen him in a few years.
You too,
You
Murad.
look great, man.
Another tough question.
Sure.
Netherlands farmers are struggling with framing the debate that was very much focused on the kind of challenges that you discussed. What can they do to get that story to their government so the government doesn't take one of the very successful agricultural economies in the world and turn it upside down?
You're talking about the Netherlands?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's the same challenge, Kent, that you're having in all the jurisdictions. It's about how do you take away the sustainability and the greenhouse gas reduction side, and how do you really quantify it and communicate it? Gone are the days where anecdotal is enough. Relying on the desire of consumers isn't enough. Regulators have to see a clear path to achieving, scope 3, ESG, scope 3 measurables in order to make sure that they continue to support and endorse and invest in agriculture. Netherlands have been a model, a very small country with very intensive agriculture. That's also one of their challenges, though, is that they have a really intense agriculture in a very compact, land mass. Canada's situation is very different. We have such a large land mass that when we look at the overall gains in broad acre production, that's what ultimately, we're counting on in the co-op project, is that the carbon intensity of canola will continue to decline as we continue to measure data and gather with sensors. So as you have more intensity in a more compact space, it's harder, Kent, over time to make your argument. So I think that that's a challenge. Technology and innovation is going to continue to be the key to all this. You got to do more with less. You got to work smarter, not harder, in everything you do. So I think that's the key. But I think that the opportunity for Canada is just I wish I was your guys' age again. Because, again, the runway in the next 20 and 30 years is like crazy opportunity. You will all, have a lot of satisfaction. You could all make a lot of money.
You say you wish you were our age again, and even with
For many reasons.
yeah, your AGT is still relatively new, and you're still making a huge impact in the world. If you could, if you were to start over from day one, or even day 2 or 3, what would you do differently, as far as a company and on a personal stage of things?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say that along the way, I learned a number of lessons. Like sometimes my passion gets in the way of, I go too fast, right? I get ahead of where I need to be. So I've always caught up, right? Where I deploy capital, and I said, like the North Dakota one, I kind of made the ingredient plant. Like we spent $100 million on that plant, and there was no plant-based market. I probably could have spent 40 or 50 and then done the rest later. So it was harder because I had to catch up, and when you're deploying capital, it's hard. I learned something very early on, so I'm going to kind of tell you that one. If a company is failing, usually there's a really good reason why it's failing. So I think that as, like I was 28 when I started, right? And all of a sudden I'm in my early 30s and I'm doing, multi-million-dollar deals. And I thought I was invincible. I could take a really bad company and I could make it great. I realized early on that I could take good companies and make them great, not bad companies and make them great. So, usually if a company's failing, there's a reason. So don't overestimate what you can do with it. That's one thing. I think that certainly the diversity side of how I've evolved in terms of building my management team, I think I was probably one of those that really embraced a uniform culture at the beginning. So what I would do differently is I think I lost time actually the first 8 years. It sounded like it wasn't, right? I mean, I went and by 2009, I was, 80 million in revenue. But it took me 8 years to do that. And then the next 7 years, I grew 2 billion. So I think that I didn't embrace enough diversity at the beginning. I didn't look at my opportunities quick enough. I wasn't nimble enough at the beginning. And I wasn't well enough capitalized, right? That's another problem. Those are some of the things. I think that what I never lost sight of, though, is that, I felt like I had to love what I did. And, one of the things that's been the best for me is the last 3 or 4 years I've been investing in Saskatchewan again. So I did a lot of Saskatchewan investment at the beginning. And then for about 15 years, I invested around the world and built my company. And then around 2018 and 19, I started investing in Saskatchewan again. That's been cool, right? Building more jobs here, right? We bought those railways. We put together, Eston, Beachy, Lucky Lake, Dinsmore, Elrose, Condi, Bethune, Aylesbury, all these new sites, all these new jobs. It's been cool to see that evolve. I saw somebody else moving, and then you're next. Okay. You go ahead, and then we'll get. Okay, go ahead.
Hi. I have a question for you here. So, I'm from the U.S. and learning.
No offense.
Yeah, well, I was going to shout my question across the room because from the U.S. we have a propensity to be loud. Anyways, so I was driving around Saskatchewan this summer, trying to go to places I've never been before, and I noticed that many of these small communities scattered across the province look like they're in pretty rough shape. And the farmers that you had mentioned in the story you were telling, which was excellent, thank you for sharing that. I was wondering what the relationship is between those farmers, those communities, the future, and the role that you see for AGT Foods in that space.
Yeah, I think that what we've seen is, we've seen this transformation that I talked about was really, rough on rural Saskatchewan. That early 80s, into the 1990s, it was what I called the race to the concrete grain terminals, right? That was when my mom was the mayor of our community, and we were trying to compete for 2 concrete elevators that ended up in Davidson. And Davidson flourished, right? It's maintained its population. It's got a vibrant school. It's got a hospital. It's got doctors. It's got jobs on Main Street. Those communities that didn't survive don't have hospitals, don't have schools. And so we've seen a consolidation. I think that the next chapter of this will be, again, more opportunities in rural Saskatchewan. I mean, we're building more sites. We're taking, more and more of an investment approach. That's, again, the alignment we have with, choosing Federated Co-op and Federated Co-op choosing us is we're all about developing regions of this province and regions of Western Canada for the future. We think that, there will be, logistics companies, so trucking, rail, grain handling, value-added infrastructure, all of those things ultimately creates jobs. Governments in our province and around the world have forgotten one thing. Economies function by jobs. They don't function because we're spending money or pumping money in that we're printing. Okay, at the end of the day, fundamental jobs create that. I think that we're going to see, I used the word renaissance, I think maybe in this speech or maybe it was at lunch. But you're not going to see every community revive. Unfortunately, there's just not enough infrastructure to go around. But I think that regional hubs are going to continue to build. And they'll go beyond, right? You'll have Swift Current as a hub, but you'll have communities around Swift Current that will be very vibrant. They will feed in. It'll be like a wheel and spoke, kind of a system. So Regina and Saskatoon are two engines, but Swift Current and Moose Jaw and Estevan and PA and North Battleford and Yorkton, are going to continue to be developing communities. So I'm bullish on the rural opportunity here. Like again, Saskatchewan, we didn't talk about the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project. It's a project that will take the fresh water from Lake Diefenbaker and create potentially 5 million new irrigated acres in this province. That alone, in my mind, is going to create $10 billion of new economic activity in this province. That will be centered in communities like Lucky Lake, Dinsmore, Elrose, right? That's the future.
Hi, I thank you so much for the great talk. As always, it's great to hear you speak. I'm from Rosetown, so apologies if that was my grandpa. He was a primary producer, so I'm just in advance apologies.
There you go.
For the last 20 years, you've obviously been highly involved in the agriculture industry. And about 20 years ago, there was a massive pushback in GEOs and genetic engineering within plants and ingredient inputs.
Yep.
When you have organizations like PIC and you have varieties, I'm from industry, you have varieties like Amagold that every once in a while get really hard pushback. How do you see the next 20 years looking, especially in pulse protein utilization? Obviously, there's a significant amount of investment being put into Canada in the pulse protein area. When you do small increases like 2%, 3% on a pulse, it creates massive economic
Yeah, because we're trying to extract the protein. So 2% on the start makes a big difference on the end.
Yeah, so what do you see the next 20 years looking like on genetic engineering, genetic modification, advancement?
Yeah, and this is like it's a talk that we could probably spend 2 hours just on this topic, but it's been interesting because out in the last 20 years, sometimes I get labeled as a non-GM crusader, and I think that people have to realize one thing, that for the first 15 years of my career, I was in the pulse business, and the pulse business, there is no genetically modified pulses in the world. So it wasn't that I was advocating against genetic modification. I was just saying, hey, non-GM is a big growing, demand point. It's a balance between meeting that food demand that I talked about and the intensity of agriculture, right? We need to produce more with less, work smarter, not harder. So, again, genetic modification, again, in my mind, there's no doubt it's safe. There's no doubt that there's not a human health risk. And that, countries like Turkey that are taking, the import of genetic modified materials is considered an act of bioterrorism. Okay, it's punishable by jail. And so, those kinds of extreme, views, I think are going to restrict global food supply. On the other side, consumers are speaking pretty loudly. Now, they may be uneducated, but they are speaking loudly. And, that is a concern I have for North American agriculture, is that we are heavily weighted and genetically modified. And I'm not saying that the science is wrong. The science is right. But can we turn the consumer? I think the key for us is the Americas and Asia. We're never going to change Europe. And I think that the Middle East and Africa are going more towards a non-GM. So to me, it's going to be Asia and it's going to be the Americas. That's going to be our focus. And I think that bodes well with that income growth side. Pulses, I don't see going genetically modified in the next 20 years. To me, breeding and agronomy continues to show great promise. And as long as we can continue to get major yield gains with precision agriculture and information and data, I think that the size of those crops won't attract the investment. And so from that perspective, we'll still get the yield we want without GM. So now I think canola, again, it's fine. It's great. You know, for the oil side, we're happy. On the meal side and the aquaculture side, it's a challenge. Right? Today, you know, my aqua feed can only go to the Americas and Asia. It won't go to Europe. So that'll be a challenge. But, you know, again, it's a system that works for us. Right? In Saskatchewan, without genetically modified, without Roundup Ready, without, you know, the gains we've had in the varietal management and agronomic management, we wouldn't be in the billions of dollars of gains. So we can't ignore that. I'm an advocate of continuing to use sound science. And I think that that's going to continue. In particular, in oil seeds, I see wheat and pulses still continuing down a path of data, breeding, agronomy. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Great question.
A question here from Danielle in the chat. Do you have any tips on how not to get overwhelmed by all the information and opportunities available?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's all about focus, right? It's remember what I said about have no fear, right? To me, again, fear comes from the unknown. Fear comes from lack of focus. So, you know, again, I want you to walk into your career and I want you to have a little bit of a different mindset than you might have right this second. Okay, don't think that every opportunity is expendable. Okay, I want you to always take a view. Will I feel regret if I don't take that opportunity? Or will I feel regret if I leave that opportunity? Right? I mean, and that's what I think that, you know, I see generationally. You guys are all in a hurry. You're in a hurry all the time. Right? It's the instant, you know, gratification. It's the connectivity that you've had to live with your whole lives. Right? Take a breath and think before you move and do something. Right? So again, I'm not telling you not to be nimble. I'm not telling you not to be dynamic and spontaneous and all the things that are important. But when it comes to your career, be deliberate. Right? Make a move. Every time I made a move, there was a reason I did it and what I was trying to build towards. It was a step by step. So the way I would say, you know, advice-wise to not get overwhelmed is keep your focus, have a plan. You know, don't be so married to your plan that you're not nimble. But, you know, pivot, right? Go along the way. Make decisions with data and make decisions with real facts. Don't just go by your gut all the time. Now, on the other side, though, I say follow your heart, but then I also say don't forget about your head, right? So you got to do both, right? You follow your heart, but make sure your brain's still making sure that you're following the right thing here. So.
Well, everyone, thank you very much for your questions, comments, feedback, your perspective. And Murad, thank you very much. You mentioned you travel 200 days a year. So thank you for giving us your valuable time. So I was thinking here, the sun never sets on the AGT empire. You think around the globe.
24 hours
it's
a day,
a
there's
global
somebody
operation.
working,
Thank you for showing us what it means to have both that conviction as well as the compassion, and for being not just a Saskatchewan or a Davidson success story, but a global entity that's helping to feed the world. So, Rod, thank you for representing our school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.